Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to take a whole stack of sources and basically give you the fast track to getting smart on a topic.
Yep.
And today we are, well, metaphorically strapping on our boots. We're heading to the Midwest,
Okay.
exploring something that's surprisingly competitive.
Yeah,
Private land hunting leases, specifically in Indiana.
that's right. Yeah, the Hoosier State. And our sources, they really paint this picture of a state that's seeing a real boom in this area.
A boom. Why?
Well, it seems the demand for, reliable, really high-quality hunting spots is pushing hunters, pushing them away from public lands, which can get pretty crowded.
Right, towards securing their own spot, exclusive access.
Exactly, via leasing private land.
Okay, so let's really dig into this. We're going beyond just, paying someone to hunt on their land for a weekend. This is more about the economics, the logistics of it.
Yeah.
Almost like a land investment, really. And the goal for you, listening in, is to understand why Indiana, of all places, is generating this buzz. And crucially, what are the financial details, the legal things you absolutely need to think about for a year-round lease?
Yeah, it's a trend that's fundamentally changing things. How the sort of everyday hunter gets access to good land. And understanding the Indiana market specifically, its nuances, that's really key if you want to lock down a good spot long term.
Okay, so the sources suggest Indiana was, for a long time, kind of in the shadow of, say, Iowa or Illinois, right? Known for those giant trophy whitetails.
Yeah, definitely.
So what changed? Is there like a specific data point or maybe a regulation shift that shows Indiana's not really a secret anymore? Why are hunters suddenly looking there?
Well, the data is pretty compelling, actually. The sources point to things like non-resident deer license sales. They've jumped like nearly 30% in just the last 5 years.
Wow, 30%, that's huge.
It is. And that kind of growth, it doesn't happen by accident. It's driven by something real. And what seems to be driving it is the habitat diversity and just the consistency of the game populations.
Talk about it having a little bit of everything. What does that actually mean on the ground for a hunter?
It means you're not just stuck with one type of terrain or hunt. Down south, you get these really rugged, heavily wooded hills, just perfect cover for holding mature bucks.
Okay.
But then you head north and it shifts. Big agricultural areas, lots of food, which means generally higher deer numbers. So it gives you a really solid, well-rounded experience. Whitetails, sure, but also wild turkey. Indiana's got tons of turkeys.
You mentioned diversity. So beyond deer and turkey, is there another species that maybe surprises people that drives some of these maybe higher-end Indiana leases?
Yeah, actually. Waterfowl. It's something people might not immediately think of for Indiana.
Really? Waterfowl?
Yeah. Indiana sits right in some major migratory flyways. So for hunters looking for those mixed-use leases, finding a property with some marshland or maybe ponds along those flight paths, that adds a whole other layer of value, sometimes significant value for those specialized hunters.
Huh. Okay, let's talk rules then. Regulations. How does Indiana stack up against other Midwest states? What makes their season structure attractive enough that someone from, say, Ohio or Kentucky would drive over?
It really comes down to length and convenience. The archery season, for instance, is incredibly long. Starts early October, runs all the way to early January.
That is long.
Yeah, but the real kicker, especially for non-residents, might be the rifle season. It's 2 weeks in November, but crucially, it always covers 3 full weekends.
3 weekends, I see.
Right, and if you're driving in from out of state, maybe you only have limited vacation days, that schedule makes a huge difference, maximizes your opportunity.
That flexibility is key. Okay, but success isn't just about this year's hunt, right? It's long-term. What about game management? How does the Indiana DNR, maybe landowners too, show this commitment the sources talk about?
Well, interestingly, it often shows up directly in the lease agreements. This isn't always just passive land rental,
Oh, so?
We're seeing more leases that incorporate elements of quality deer management, QDM.
Okay.
So the sources talk about things like mandatory antler restrictions on the lease, sometimes even stricter than the state minimums, or sometimes requirements for the hunter, the lessee, to actually put in and maintain food plots.
So the lease isn't just paying for access. It's more like the hunter becomes a partner in actually improving the habitat and managing the wildlife long term.
Exactly. It's framed as an investment in the future quality of that specific property, not just harvesting what's there right now. And that kind of long-term thinking, that's often what separates those really high-value leases from, just a basic permission slip.
Okay, partnership QDM rules. Sounds like it could get expensive. Let's tackle the big one. money.
Right.
The sources make a strong financial case for leasing, but is this really something for the average hunter, or is it more of an elite thing? The main comparison they draw is between a pricey guided hunt and a year-round lease.
Yeah, and this is often the aha moment that gets people seriously considering a lease. Think about a one-week guided whitetail hunt, where you just show up, they've done all the scouting, set the stands.
Yeah, those can be pricey.
Easily $5,000, maybe $8,000, sometimes more. It adds up fast.
Okay, but the sources claim you can get an Indiana lease annually for less than half of that, let's say conservatively, $2,500 a year. That's a massive difference.
Right.
But hang on, that feels a little too simple.
Mm-hmm.
If you're leasing land for the whole year, aren't you taking on some serious risk? Do the sources talk about the other costs? Like, what about liability? That seems critical.
You nailed it. That is probably the single most important detail the average person overlooks initially. That quoted lease price, that's usually just the baseline access fee.
Right.
For anyone seriously considering this, you have to factor in liability insurance. That year-round lease almost always requires the hunter or maybe the hunting group to carry a policy, often $1 million minimum coverage.
$1 million. Okay.
Yeah, and that adds, another maybe $500 to $1,000 per year onto the total cost. So if you ignore that, your financial calculation is just incomplete. It's misleading.
Okay, so that bums the cost up. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But even with insurance, it often still comes out cheaper than that guided hunt, and you get access 365 days a year.
Precisely. And that year-round access, that's the real value proposition, isn't it?
Right. It's not just November anymore.
Exactly. You can use the property for other things. Fishing, maybe, camping in the summer, trail riding, if that's allowed. And critically, for hunters, intensive scouting across multiple seasons.
Like what?
Well, after deer season wraps up, you go back in April for shed hunting. Then over the summer, you're doing surveillance, maybe putting out trail cams, planning food plots. You're learning that property inside and out.
Okay, but hold on. If I'm leasing it year-round, and I invite, say, my family out for a weekend camping trip, am I opening myself or the landowner up to more risk? How do leases handle non-hunting liability? Do the sources mention that?
That's a really important point. And the better lease agreements, the kind outlined in the sources, they are very explicit about this.
Wow.
They clearly define what non-hunting activities are permitted. And often they'll require the lessee, the hunter, to basically indemnify the landowner against any liabilities specifically arising from those activities. So, yeah, if you plan to use it for more than just hunting, the contract absolutely needs to reflect that to protect everyone involved.
Got it. Okay, so for the everyday hunter, the common strategy to afford this, even with insurance, is splitting the cost, right? The group approach.
Absolutely. Sharing the lease among a few buddies or maybe even a whole formal hunting club.
The sources seem to endorse that. But I imagine the real challenge there isn't just dividing the money. That's the easy part. What logistical hurdles did the sources highlight for group leases?
You're right. The money's simple math. The real challenge is coordination and potential conflict. The sources really stress needing some kind of formal structure, maybe a hierarchy, definitely a schedule for who gets access when and where. Think about it. 4 guys lease 100 acres. Who gets the prime stand during the peak of the rut?
Yeah, that could get tense.
Exactly. If that stuff isn't worked out beforehand, ideally in a written agreement among the group members, like a sub-agreement to the main lease, then those traditions, even friendships, can sour pretty quickly.
So group leasing really demands organization. You've got to coordinate shared chores, maybe, like maintaining access roads, planting those food plots we talked about, making sure everyone follows the QDM rules if they exist. It's almost like running a small business partnership, but for hunting.
That's a perfect way to put it. It really elevates it from just a casual hunting trip to a much more coordinated, results-focused management effort over the long term.
Okay, we've established the value, the why, now the how. How do you actually find one of these great spots in Indiana? What are the practical steps? And why do certain counties keep popping up in the sources as the premium spots?
Right, finding the lease. Well, if you're primarily focused on high-quality whitetails and maybe turkey, the sources suggest concentrating on areas with generally the best cover and maybe less human pressure.
Makes sense. Which counties specifically?
The names that come up repeatedly are places like Park County, Switzerland County down south, Greene, Owen, Dearborn County too. Those seem to be hot spots.
Why those ones? Park in Switzerland, for instance. What makes them stand out?
Generally, they have rougher terrain, more timber, less intensive row crop agriculture compared to some other parts of the state. And that rougher terrain, those big wooded tracts, they provide better security cover, more secluded bedding areas, escape routes, basically places where deer feel safer and have a better chance to reach maturity. Less pressure often equals older deer.
Gotcha. So once you've maybe narrowed down a region like that, you can't just drive around knocking on doors all day. That's inefficient. The sources really push digital scouting before you commit time or money. What key things should you be looking for on satellite maps?
Yeah, digital scouting is crucial. Beyond the obvious stuff, finding water sources, looking for good edge habitat where fields meet woods, identifying topographical funnels like saddles or ridge tops.
Right, the basics.
The modern approach really emphasizes assessing human pressure remotely. How secluded is this property, really? You need to look at road access. Is it a quiet dead-end lane or right off a busy highway? How close are towns? And critically, what are the neighbors doing?
Neighbors, how does that factor in?
Well, think about it. Is the lease bordering a huge chunk of public land that gets hammered with pressure? That might spill over. Or is it next to a big private farm that's managed really well for wildlife? That could be a huge plus. Properties next to sanctuaries or well-managed land often hold more game.
That's a great point. And it's amazing we can gather that kind of intel from home now. What specific tools or features within things like OnX, HuntStand, or even Google Earth are most helpful for this remote evaluation?
They each have strengths. Google Earth is great for looking back in time, seeing how the land use might have changed over the last 5 or 10 years. Has there been logging recently?
Yeah.
New development nearby?
Okay.
OnX is probably the go-to for most hunters now for precise property boundaries, ownership info, marking potential stand locations, access points, plotting trails, really mapping out the place. And HuntStand adds layers like detailed predictive wind data, which, when you combine that with the topography you saw on the map, helps you figure out where you can actually place a stand and hunt it effectively without your scent blowing into baiting areas. It's about strategy.
Okay, makes sense. And then for actually finding available leases, trying to avoid that huge time suck of cold calling dozens, maybe hundreds of landowners, what resources do the sources point to?
Yeah, that's tough. Companies that act as intermediaries are becoming more popular. The sources mention services like Basecamp Leasing, for example.
How do they help?
They basically aggregate lease opportunities. Landowners list their property, and hunters can browse detailed listings online. You get photos, topo maps, boundary maps, descriptions of the habitat, rules. It centralizes the search.
So it helps you vet properties that fit your budget, your hunting style, your management goals much more efficiently.
Exactly. It drastically cuts down that search time, helps you get from looking to actually signing a lease much faster and with, hopefully, fewer headaches. Hashtag tag outro.
All right, so this deep dive really shows that Indiana, well, it's not really overlooked anymore, is it? It genuinely delivers this compelling mix of quality hunting opportunities, incredible habitat diversity, and pretty good accessibility.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But the key takeaway seems to be understanding that the lease isn't just paying a fee. It's a real investment of time, effort in management, and definitely requires that legal diligence we talked about.
Absolutely. And the conclusion that the sources keep coming back to is that a well-chosen lease, especially in a place like Indiana, provides something incredibly valuable in today's hunting world. Reliability.
Reliability.
Yeah, it guarantees you your spot, a place you can return to season after season, learn intimately, manage, and enjoy without that constant pressure and uncertainty you often find on public land.
Right, a home base.
Okay.
And as this whole leasing market matures, we also have to consider the other side of the coin, the landowner. Our sources definitely mentioned that landowners are increasingly realizing the value tied up in their huntable land. You're seeing it now as a potential source of real additional income, and maybe even a way to increase property security, deterring trespassing.
That shift in perception is huge. From land maybe being just a property tax bill to land being a marketable asset with a tangible return through leasing. That's the core economic engine driving this whole trend, and something we really need to keep an eye on.
Okay, so building on that, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on.
All right.
If maximizing property value for landowners increasingly involves recognizing and capitalizing on its monetary return through things like hunting leases, what might be the long-term ripple effects? Specifically, what could this mean for the future availability and maybe even the quality of public land access as more and more private land, even marginal pieces, potentially gets locked up into exclusive income-generating leases?
That's a big question. Connects economics, hunting traditions, access, conservation.
Yeah, definitely something to think about. We'll leave you with that one. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll catch you next time.